You are 65 years old, and it is 6 in the morning. The alarm has not gone off yet, but your body is already awake, already moving through a hormonal storm that most people never learn about. A storm that decides more than any pill, more than any supplement, whether you end up in the small group of people who live 30 more years past this exact moment, or in the much larger group who do not. This is not motivational talk. This is measurable biology. Researchers have been tracking this exact window for decades. And what they found should change the way you treat the first hour after you open your eyes. Today on Smart Psychology, we are going to walk through what that first hour should look like, and why it matters so much more after 65 than at any other point in your life. Before we go further, if you are the kind of person who wants to understand how your own body actually works, instead of just being told what to do, this bill is built for that. So take a second, hit subscribe, because we publish this kind of research breakdown every week, and it genuinely helps people make better decisions in the exact moments, the minutes, a moment that matter. Now let us get into what is actually happening inside a 65-year-old body in the minutes after waking. Here is the part almost nobody tells you. The first hour after you wake up is, statistically, the most dangerous hour of your entire day. Cardiologists have known this for decades. It even has a name. They call it the morning surge. In the 30 to 60 minutes after you open your eyes, your body releases a sharp burst of cortisol and a related group of hormones called catecholamines, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. These hormones exist to get you moving, to raise your heart rate, to raise your blood pressure, to prepare your muscles and your brain for the demands of the day. In a 25-year-old body, this surge is barely noticeable. The blood vessels are flexible. The heart adapts instantly. The whole system absorbs the shock without strain. But after 65, the arteries have lost a significant amount of their elasticity. Decades of use have left them stiffer, less able to expand and contract smoothly. So when that same morning surge hits an older cardiovascular system, blood pressure can spike far more sharply, in some people by 20 or even 30 points in a matter of minutes. At the same time, your blood becomes measurably stickier in the morning. Platelets, the small cells responsible for clotting, become more likely to clump together. This is a well-documented pattern, and it is one of the reasons researchers going back to a landmark study, led by cardiologist James Muller in the 1980s, found that heart attacks cluster heavily in the hours between 6 in the morning and noon. Later research on stroke, led in large part by Japanese cardiologist Kazuomi Kario, showed the same clustering for stroke, particularly in people over 65 with high blood pressure. Kario coined the term morning surge hypertension specifically to describe this dangerous spike, and his research found that people with the sharpest morning blood pressure surges had a stroke risk several times higher than people whose blood pressure rose gradually. To understand why age changes everything here, it helps to understand what arterial stiffness actually is. A healthy artery behaves almost like a piece of elastic tubing. It expands slightly with every heartbeat and then recoils, smoothing out the pressure wave so it does not slam against the vessel walls. Researchers measure this using something called pulse wave velocity, essentially how fast the pressure wave from each heartbeat travels through the arterial system. In a young, healthy adult, that wave moves relatively slowly because the artery walls absorb and cushion it. Decades of studies, including long-running data from the Framingham Heart Study, have shown that pulse wave velocity rises steadily with age as collagen and elastin fibers in the artery walls gradually stiffen and calcify. By the time most people reach their late 60s, that cushioning effect is substantially reduced, so the same burst of adrenaline and cortisol that a younger artery would absorb smoothly instead hits a stiffer, less forgiving system, and the pressure spike becomes sharper and more sudden. This is compounded by changes in the autonomic nervous system itself. The balance between the sympathetic branch, which raises heart rate and blood pressure, and the parasympathetic branch, which calms things back down, tends to shift with age toward greater sympathetic dominance, meaning the accelerator works a little too well while the brakes respond a little more slowly. Put those two changes together, a stiffer arterial system and a slower calming response, and you have the physiological explanation for why the exact same morning surge that a 40-year-old barely notices can be a genuinely dangerous event for someone 25 years older. There is also a medication timing angle worth knowing about if you take blood pressure medication. A growing area of research called chronotherapy has looked at whether the time of day medication is taken changes its effectiveness. A large trial known as the Hygia chronotherapy trial, involving thousands of participants and published in the European Heart Journal, found that patients who took their blood pressure medication at bedtime, rather than in the morning, had significantly lower rates of cardiovascular events over several years of follow-up. The proposed reason connects directly to everything we just covered. Medication taken at night is better positioned to blunt that early morning surge rather than arriving after the surge has already happened. This finding has been debated, and some later analyses have questioned parts of the methodology, but it points in the same direction as the walking and light research. Timing matters just as much as the intervention itself, and this is exactly the kind of conversation worth having directly with your own doctor rather than changing medication timing on your own. So think about what most people over 65 are actually doing during this exact window. The alarm goes off, and within seconds they are sitting up, reaching for the phone, scrolling through overnight news or messages, standing up quickly to start the coffee maker, maybe rushing because they feel behind on the morning already. Every one of those actions adds a jolt of stress and physical exertion directly on top of a cardiovascular system that is already experiencing its most volatile hour. Checking the phone first thing raises cortisol further through psychological stress. Standing up abruptly can trigger a sudden drop in blood pressure as the body struggles to redirect blood upward against gravity, a phenomenon called orthostatic hypotension, which becomes far more common with age and is itself a leading cause of falls in older adults. Rushing raises heart rate on top of a heart rate that is already elevated from the natural surge. None of this is dramatic on any single morning, but multiply it by thousands of mornings across years, and you start to understand why cardiovascular events are so heavily concentrated in exactly this window of life. This is where the actual solution begins, and it is far simpler than most people expect. The first correction is time. Do not launch directly out of bed the moment the alarm sounds. Give your body 60 to 90 seconds simply lying still, breathing slowly, letting the surge happen without adding anything on top of it. This alone reduces the combined shock to your cardiovascular system. The second correction is water. A glass of room temperature or warm water before anything else. Your body has gone 6 to 8 hours without fluid, and mild dehydration on top of thickened, stickier morning blood is exactly the wrong combination. Rehydrating first thing measurably improves blood viscosity and gives your heart an easier medium to pump. The third correction, and this is the one that the research suggests matters most for people specifically over 65, is light movement combined with natural light exposure within the first hour of waking. Not intense exercise, not a gym session, simply a walk, 10 to 20 minutes outside if possible. And here is where the data becomes genuinely striking. A large study published in JAMA Internal Medicine, led by researcher Ai-Min Lee, followed thousands of older women and tracked their daily step counts against mortality over several years. Women who averaged around 4,400 steps a day had significantly lower mortality than women who averaged around 2,700 steps. And the benefit continued climbing up to about 7,500 steps, at which point it began to plateau. The researchers were careful to note that this was not about hitting some magic number. The mortality benefit showed up at levels far below the often quoted 10,000 step target, which turns out to have originated from a Japanese marketing campaign in the 1960s rather than from clinical research. What actually predicts longevity is consistent, moderate movement, and a morning walk is one of the most reliable ways older adults naturally accumulate it. There is also a specific physiological reason a morning walk works so well for a body over 65. Gentle movement gradually raises heart rate and blood pressure. Instead of the abrupt spike caused by standing and rushing, it acts almost like a warm-up lap before the rest of the day begins. It also activates what researchers call the muscle pump, the repeated contraction of leg muscles during walking that helps push blood back up through the veins toward the heart. This is particularly valuable for older adults because it directly counters the pooling of blood in the legs that contributes to orthostatic hypotension. Walking also stimulates mitochondrial activity in muscle tissue. And mitochondrial density and efficiency are two of the most consistently studied biological markers of aging. Researchers looking at longevity across populations, including the long-running Blue Zones research led by Dan Buettner, found that in nearly every population where people commonly live past 90 in good health, from Sardinia to Okinawa to Loma Linda, daily incidental movement, especially walking, was a near universal thread. Not intense training, just consistent, unavoidable, low-intensity movement built into the shape of an ordinary day. There is a broader measure that ties directly into this: cardiorespiratory fitness, often estimated through a value called VO2 max, which reflects how efficiently your body can take in and use oxygen. Researchers, including exercise physiologist Jonathan Myers, analyzed data across tens of thousands of patients and found that cardiorespiratory fitness predicted mortality more strongly than traditional risk factors like smoking, diabetes, and even prior heart disease. In that research, people in the lowest fitness category had a risk of death roughly 2 to 3 times higher than people in the highest category. And the encouraging part of that data is that fitness level is not fixed. Even modest, regular movement, like a daily morning walk, measurably improves cardiorespiratory fitness over a period of months, especially in people who start from a relatively sedentary baseline, which describes a large share of adults over 65. In other words, the walk is not just burning calories or passing time, it is directly training the exact physiological system, oxygen delivery and cardiovascular efficiency, that shows up again and again as one of the strongest predictors of how long a person actually lives. Now let us talk about the light exposure part specifically, because this is often overlooked, and it may be just as important as the walking itself. Your body runs on an internal clock called the circadian rhythm, and that clock is calibrated primarily by light hitting your eyes, specifically morning light. A research group led by neuroscientist Sachin Panda at the Salk Institute has spent years documenting how circadian rhythm disruption accelerates with age, and how it connects to a surprisingly wide range of health outcomes. When older adults get bright natural light within the first hour or two of waking, their circadian clock receives a strong, clear signal. This improves the timing and quality of melatonin release later that night, which in turn improves sleep depth and sleep continuity. And sleep quality after 65 is not a minor comfort issue. Poor sleep architecture in older adults has been linked in multiple studies to accelerated cognitive decline. Researchers studying the relationship between circadian disruption and Alzheimer's disease, including work associated with neurologist David Holtzman and colleagues, have found that disrupted sleep and circadian rhythm correlate with increased buildup of amyloid plaques in the brain, the exact protein deposits associated with Alzheimer's pathology. Morning light exposure is one of the simplest, lowest-cost interventions available for keeping that internal clock properly set. And pairing it with a walk means you are addressing your cardiovascular system and your circadian system in the very same 10 minutes. Morning light also plays a quieter role in something older adults worry about constantly: falling. Falls are one of the leading causes of injury-related death after 65, and the risk connects to several of the threads we have already covered: orthostatic hypotension from standing too quickly, reduced muscle strength in the legs, and disrupted sleep that leaves a person groggy or unsteady the next day. Natural light exposure helps regulate sleep. Sleep supports muscle recovery and next-day alertness, and a body that is steady and alert is simply less likely to stumble on a step or lose balance getting out of a chair. None of these systems operate in isolation, and that is really the deeper point behind this entire video. The cardiovascular system, the circadian clock, the muscular system, and even fall risk are not separate categories. They are all downstream of the same small window of decisions made in the first hour after waking. If any of this is landing for you, or if you have an older parent you are thinking about right now, go ahead and share this video with them. Sometimes the information that changes a habit is not complicated. It is just something nobody had explained clearly before, and that is exactly what we try to do here on Smart Psychology every week. There is one more piece to this morning sequence, and it might be the piece that matters most for how many of those extra years you actually get to enjoy. Protein, specifically protein eaten within that first hour or two after waking. After 65, the body enters a state researchers call anabolic resistance. Muscle tissue becomes less responsive to the same amount of dietary protein that would have easily triggered muscle building in a younger body. This matters enormously because muscle loss, known clinically as sarcopenia, is one of the single strongest predictors of mortality in older adults. A large international study called the PURE study, led by researcher Daryl Leong and published in The Lancet, measured grip strength, a simple proxy for overall muscle mass and function, across nearly 140,000 adults in 17 countries. The finding was striking. Grip strength predicted mortality more strongly than systolic blood pressure did. Every 5 kilogram reduction in grip strength was associated with a meaningfully higher risk of death from any cause. Muscle is not just about looking strong, it is metabolically active tissue that regulates blood sugar, supports balance and fall prevention, and maintains independence in daily activities, all of which are directly tied to how many years someone lives and how many of those years they live well. Research from Douglas Patton Jones at the University of Texas Medical Branch has shown that spreading protein intake across the day, rather than loading it almost entirely at dinner as most people do, produces significantly greater muscle protein synthesis over 24 hours, and morning specifically matters, because muscle tissue is most receptive to amino acids after the overnight fast, roughly 25 to 35 grams of quality protein at breakfast. Eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, or a combination, gives an older body its best opportunity of the day to actually build and preserve muscle, rather than slowly lose it. And while diet alone cannot fully replace resistance training, even a small amount of muscle loading, standing up and sitting down slowly a few extra times, gripping something firmly, using light hand weights for a few minutes, layered on top of that morning protein window, appears in multiple smaller trials to meaningfully improve the muscle building response compared to protein alone. The two work together rather than as separate strategies. And neither one requires a gym membership or a trainer to start producing a measurable effect. So here is the full sequence. Laid out simply: wake up, and instead of launching upright immediately, lie still for 60 to 90 seconds and let the natural hormonal surge happen, without adding anything on top of it. Drink a glass of water before anything else. Then, within that first hour, take a walk outside if you possibly can. 10 to 20 minutes is enough. Letting natural light hit your eyes while your leg muscles gently raise your heart rate the safe way instead of the abrupt way. And follow that with a protein-rich breakfast that gives your muscles the raw material they are primed to use at exactly that time. None of this requires special equipment. None of it requires money. None of it requires willpower, in the way a strict diet or an intense workout program does. It simply requires understanding why the first hour matters, and giving your body what it is already asking for. Some people hear all of this and assume it sounds too simple to actually move a number as large as 30 years, and that skepticism is fair. No single habit is a guarantee for any individual person. Genetics, existing conditions, and countless other factors all play a role, but longevity research consistently points to the same conclusion. It is rarely one dramatic intervention that separates people who live long, healthy lives from those who do not. It is the compounding effect of small, correct choices repeated across thousands of mornings. A body that avoids an unnecessary blood pressure spike every single day, that accumulates gentle movement every single day, that keeps its internal clock properly calibrated every single day.